Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us again. We have a special guest here in the studio today. It is the Future Blockchain Summit week happening here in Dubai, and that means a whole load of crypto people are in town, even more than normal. And one of them is my guest today, Andrew Durgee, who is the CEO, who is the president, I should say, of Republic. Now, Republic is a big player in the crypto ecosystem. But, Andrew, before we talk about that and what Republic does, one of the things that really stood out to me about you was that you have been in crypto since 2010, which is longer than pretty much anyone. So before we talk about Republic and what it does, can you just, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got in earlier than pretty much anyone bar Satoshi?
Yeah, happy to. And, I usually tell people the only difference between me and someone who got in 2017 is I just suffered a lot more. If you joined in 2017, you got to experience a lot more fun stuff. You didn't have to go through as much of your family telling you that it's a scam and a fraud and there's many
crazy, yeah.
And I'm crazy and years of ridicule and maybe I'm just a sucker for punishment. But yeah, I've been in since early 2010. A buddy of mine found it on a libertarian IRC chat. Anyone who's been around the internet long enough to remember IRC chats. And it was just a hobby in the beginning, frankly. We were experimenting with it. There was nothing at the time. You had to build everything yourself. We're running mining rigs, Radeon 7990, pancake stack, the graphics cards. And it was literally worth nothing. I do remember my electric bill was over $2,000 a month, though, for a while. And it's just gained more and more momentum. I remember when it hit 25 cents, I thought that was the craziest thing ever. I think we threw a party for that. And wow. It ended up just becoming kind of a core of my ethos for this, not just myself, but how it could be potentially a social movement. So I was CEO and co-founder of a company called the Coin Tree. We're the first doing multi-sig security storage for Bitcoin 2011, 2012, and 2013.
Right.
After that, I was in the hedge fund space, running due diligence and fundamental analysis engineering teams for hedge funds, most of which was crypto specific. Everything ran through us back then. And then I became partner at TLDR Capital, which was the number one ICO advisory firm globally, 2016, 17, and 18. And then I joined Republic in early 2019 to build out what was meant to be the first vertically integrated crypto investment bank. And we finished that integration very, very early last year, and now we're going through a full digital merchant bank evolution.
Okay. So does that mean that you had a tech background to start with then?
Oh, yeah, I'm an engineer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So engineering and startup background. Had an early startup out of college. We had a successful exit out of that just kind of gave me a lot of freedoms earlier in my life. Really just got lucky, frankly. And that allowed me to do a lot of experimentation. So when Bitcoin came around, I had some means to do some experimentation, play around with it, and it's given back to me. Yeah, given back to me.
Yeah. Because I always think those people who got in that early, you think back and you'd be like, wow, wouldn't it have been amazing to be mining back then, for instance, when you could still do it on a CPU, I guess.
Oh yeah.
But I guess so there would have been people who discovered it and I guess understood it from a financial perspective, from a social perspective, a philosophical perspective even, but perhaps there weren't that many people who understood it from a technical perspective. And I guess for you, that must have been a huge advantage in that you would look at something like mining and understand how it works and how it could be done.
Yeah, it initially wasn't overly complicated. And
right.
Keep in mind, the Satoshi white paper is only like 2 pages.
It's
It's not this in-depth technical document. Most of the documentation was in forums and chats and things like that. But yeah, you had to build some of your own additional frameworks, either whether that was from storage or from your mining rigs or mining pools, which eventually kind of the pools all came together. But the community was small out of the gate. I mean, Bitcoin conferences in the early days had 2 types of people at it, like hardcore nerdy engineers and then diehard anti-government libertarians and all camo. It was like the weirdest conferences. This is a emulsification of people that would normally never be together. But everyone was very motivated to kind of figure it out, right? And it was interesting when it really wasn't worth much because the motivations weren't as financial.
Yeah.
Right? It was much more like, can this be something more? What are the social implications of this? What are the political ramifications of this? Later on, when the financial aspect came, then the motivations all changed and people's interests very much changed and who was involved changed. All of a sudden, the conference started to have people with ties, right? Like that, and that kind of evolution, took years, but eventually moved that way.
Yeah.
It's actually really funny because it started out as very almost meme-ish and then went to this very institutional kind of framework and concept, and then kind of started to degenerate itself back into meme-ish with NFTs and things like that. And now we're seeing this curve back upward towards institution, especially as now you're starting to see a lot more real-world asset type plays. So it's an interesting kind of sine curve that it goes. Who knows what the next curve will look like?
Yeah. It must be a crazy thing to have been, going to these early conferences in 2010, 2011, which would have been just like a few people in a small meeting room somewhere. Or
I mean, depends where you were. If I was in South Florida, so it was these just small little conferences. If you were in New York, the big thing was the Satoshi trading circles, out of NYU and stuff like that. So, all these different pockets kind of had their own way of how they touched the space.
Yeah.
It wasn't, then when it became commercialized later, obviously, then everyone kind of congregated to these crazy events and parties and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, in the beginning, it was always funny too, because no one, if you brought everyone together and you had a big dinner or a big event, maybe everyone had a lot of Bitcoin, but it wasn't liquid, so no one could pay for anything, right? It was always okay, who's gonna pay for the dinner? But it's no one was liquid, so it was a really funny mechanism.
Yeah, everyone's sitting, unbeknownst to them, sitting on huge stacks of Bitcoin that would one day be
but
enough to buy the restaurant.
No one truly at the time, early days, no one was thinking about it at that level. The only time I ever thought Bitcoin was dead was when it crashed from $32 to $2 in 6 hours.
Wow.
And that was, we turned off all of our mining rigs, turned off everything, because it was very not profitable at that point.
Yeah.
And and all these other crashes that I've experienced over time I've been numb to, because that one was the only one that really shook me to where I was all right, well, that was a fun experiment. Okay, what am I going to do next? But yeah, so it's just, you just got to kind of take everything in perspective.
Yeah, perspective is so important, isn't it? Because people worry about it maybe crashing down to the 20K level now. It's
who cares?
I mean, much worse.
Why those crashes really hurt in the last kind of run is because people built their businesses on a Bitcoin 30K model.
Yeah.
And if you're building your business on a model that's centered around a potential speculative asset, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Right. One of the benefits at Republic is we've got over 20 different revenue lines. So if there is a bear market or an area of the market suffering, we can move our focus to other revenue lines within the company to carry us through.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another area that the Web3 businesses really struggle in, is most Web3 businesses only have one, maybe two revenue lines. And when you're not diversified, you really are married to speculative pricing, and that makes running a business very difficult.
Yeah. And I guess that's what we're seeing now in this stage of the bear market, isn't it? Well, I guess it kind of started last year, had Coinbase laying off all those people, didn't it? And now we're still seeing it. We're still seeing layoffs at crypto and Web3 companies. That is unfortunately.
But that's not a Web3 explicit experience. You're, whether it's at Meta or BlackRock or whatever, Blackstone, everyone's laying off. You got to remember, we had the largest capital injection ever into the global market system in COVID when the U.S. just printed literally trillions of dollars, right? And so that money flooded the system. A lot of what drove these crazy valuations and participation in Web3 is related to that capital injection, right? So that capital's basically now wound down or dried up. And so now that's why you're starting to see all these different businesses having to cut back. And it's also why you're not seeing as active or an aggressive as an investment market, especially in the Web3 as we saw previously.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people ignore that component of it, but that macro piece was a big, magnifier for what was happening.
Yeah. This thing didn't exist the whole Web3 crypto space didn't exist in a bubble. This was all. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So let's talk a bit about Republic then, because as you say, you've got, Republic does a lot of things within the crypto industry. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the company is and what its kind of main verticals are?
Yeah, so we are a nose to tail digital merchant bank that facilitates capital formation, primary issuance, wallet storage, tokenization, infrastructure, and treasury management, which sounds like a lot of things, but it is. And that's because we fundamentally believe that in order for this space to be successful, that products and services have to be vertically integrated.
Yeah.
And that's one of the bigger issues in the space is that right now, to interface with the space, you have to work with a lot of different businesses, right? So, and traditionally, and this is getting better, but traditionally, like, you'd have to work with, a primary issuance platform. Then you'd have to go get yourself a wallet of some kind, and then you'd have to onboard into some other exchange. And the more of these things that you add into the stack that aren't integrated, the more friction forward the experience is, right? Yeah. The more crypto native somebody has to be. And that just doesn't work long term. Also, every time you add a new entity, and every entity has different motivations and goals and directive, so they're not all aligned. So by pulling all these things into one vertically integrated stack, we can deliver a much cleaner experience to our users, and then whether that's on the B2C side or on the B2B side, because we sit with both. Right. We're the largest private primary issuance platform in the world. We're the only token sale platform that can sell to U.S. retail investors. We're extremely regulated, one of the most regulated businesses in the United States. We've been audited formally and informally over 51 times by SEC and FINRA. Wow. We have unique licenses that really nobody else has. And so, our B2C side, we have, 3 million plus or so KYC investors. And then we have our institutional side, which has all your standard names as far as the institutional partners, right? So we kind of sit at the fulcrum of those two pieces, which in fintech, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, you've got these various different facets to the business, which at times like this is obviously a really important thing to have. It helps, I guess, create a moat that not many other companies are going to be able to have.
Yeah, widening. Moat that continues. It's very hard to chase us. We're big in the M&A space too, so we do a lot of acquisitions, and my favorite thing to acquire is time. Yeah. So I'm always looking at assets from a time perspective, which is why we like buying licenses. Right, licenses, generally, if you're going to go apply for whatever the license is, you'll often hear like, oh, it's going to take about 2 to 4 years to get the license. Well, you have no idea. Like, it could be 2 years, it could be 6 years. Right. And so when we go through acquisitions and we can acquire unique licenses, for us, that's like buying time. Right. So we just acquired 10% of a company. Now we're acquiring the rest of it, which is INX, the security token exchange. Right. And they have the only 24/7, 365 digital asset trading license that the SEC's ever given out. Right. So I love that type of asset.
Yeah. As an asset that, as you say, buys time, but also that so few others can have.
Correct.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you folks, but I have to let you know about the Coin Bureau deals page. Now, my team and I have been able to pull together some of the best promos and discounts in the crypto space. We're talking trading fee discounts of over 50%, thousands of dollars in bonus airdrops, amazing deals at top exchanges, reduced prices on hardware wallets, and much, much more besides. So just go to coinbureau.com/deals, also linked to below, and find the promo suited to you. Enjoy the rest of the video. So when you work with a project in this ecosystem, what to your mind are the things that you look out for in a successful project? You know, what does a project coming to you? What do you want to see from, I guess, the project itself, but also the people behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend what area of the business they're coming in for advisory, or they're coming in for tokenization or token sale or whichever. They all kind of have different criteria. But regardless, everything has to pass some basic, very stringent diligence because we are so regulated, right?
Yeah.
So like when we're doing token sales, we're running these through broker-dealer, right? So they have to pass through compliance, diligence, background checks, valuation, justification. There's all these pieces. Most don't pass. Right? The amount of projects that don't pass background checks would blow your mind, by the way. Like, it's just incredible. And these sometimes are, projects that have been well funded, but just people just fail to kind of do the extra little layer of digging.
Yeah.
And so we have to be really, really careful. So we spend a lot of time on that.
That's something that's been really kind of thrown into focus with, I guess, in the main, everything that happened with FTX last year, but just how much money was being pumped into this industry.
Yeah.
As it turns out, without, as you say, without enough in the way of due diligence. But I guess it was just kind of a spray and pray kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, FTX is a big time failure in corporate governance on a lot of levels. And it was an industry that was moving fast and furious and, fueled by this FOMO component.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. But, I think we come out stronger. And I always like to use the example that, Russia tried to kill crypto, couldn't kill crypto. China tried to kill crypto, couldn't kill crypto. US tried to kill crypto, couldn't kill crypto. And then crypto tried really hard to kill itself, and it couldn't kill itself. So at that point, I don't know what actually ends up killing it. Basically, probably nothing.
Yeah. With luck, we're kind of running out of people to kill it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
If the industry can't kill itself.
Yeah, I don't know what bullet is really left to use at this point. So it has quite a bit of fortitude.
Yeah. So speaking of that, obviously, all these attempts to kill crypto, including by crypto itself, have meant that at the moment, this is a kind of tough time for the industry. And that's been playing out over the last year or so. It's not just that prices are down, but it's also, as we've discussed, companies in Web3 and elsewhere are laying off. And I think market sentiment as well is very low. So there are obviously quite a few things that need to change, that need to improve before we, I hesitate to say bull market, but before we see an improvement in the overall, perception of the industry and the growth of the industry. What kind of stage do you feel that we're in now? Do you feel that we still have quite a long way to go on this journey in this bear market, if you want to call it that? Or do you feel that we're sort of in the process of turning a corner?
Yeah, it's actually kind of both, which is a very, very weird answer. There's a couple more potential black swan events that are on the horizon that we're certainly tracking and keeping our eyes on. Okay. But then there's some also really positive ones as well. Things like the halvening obviously is going to be a big macro event happening kind of at the end of this year that we're keeping an eye on. Bitcoin ETF is a big piece of it. US is definitely going to put together some regulatory, holistic regulatory compliance for the space, which will unlock a bunch of institutional capital. You got to remember that the bull run that took place in 2019 happened because 2019 and 2020, because of this very small little OCC ruling that happened in the United States. So there was a banking ruling that basically allowed certain banks to hold stable coins. And a ruling I use lightly because I think that people chose to interpret it a particular way. Right. But it unlocked institutional capital because there's a number of funds and banks, et cetera, that their mandate is they can only touch things that banks can custody.
Okay.
Right. And so when it opened up that door just enough, you got to get a taste of what institutional capital looks like as it was flooding into the market. Right. But again, in a very small capacity. So I think when we look at the Bitcoin ETF, in parallel to happening is a very, very big macro event. And then you match that with the regulatory stance or regulatory loosening or regulatory clarity that the United States is going to roll out. That's a good mix, right?
Yeah.
And that inevitably, I think, that has more staying power. Any black swan event that happens is always temporary. I try to let people remember that, whether that's a Mount Gox collapsing or an FTX collapsing, is a short-term pain that then reflects on long-term growth, right? So we get better from that.
Yeah.
So there's, again, some things in the distance that probably will bring some pain, but the other stuff that is positive creates long-term growth. So that's kind of why it's really a mix overall.
Yeah. So kind of positive news is generally, something that plays out over the long term, whereas negative news, like some of those things we just mentioned, that tends to be more short-term pain.
Yeah, and I myself and Republic takes a very long-term, I don't know how much longer term I can get in the space, but we take a very long-term view at this. We're not in it for the short term. And so we are cognizant of the short-term ramifications of some of the problems, but the long-term positive alpha from what is happening with the three things that I mentioned will carry much more weight long-term.
Yeah. Do you think the industry as a whole, and obviously you have insight in this, talking to institutional investors a lot, do you think the industry has learned from the mistakes that we saw in the last year, that we saw in 2022, Celsius, BlockFi, FTX, etc.? Because there is a sense, isn't there, that these mistakes kind of keep on happening. Mount Gox, which I'm sure you remember well because you were there, at the time, and that was shortly after I heard about Bitcoin, and I remember thinking that was one of my reasons for first buying Bitcoin, because I was like, wow, if it can survive this, then it can survive anything. But then these mistakes have kind of kept on happening. Now, do you think that's something? Do you get any sense that the big players in the industry have learned that things kind of have to change, or do you think we're still likely to see this kind of this Wild West scenario where people get very overexcited, we get a lot of money flowing in, these companies are allowed to kind of mushroom that then turn out to be built on sand?
First off, humans only learn through pain.
Yeah.
Right.
Very true.
When you're very happy, you're actually generally not learning.
Yeah.
Right. So humans learn through pain. It's like part of our DNA. But also humans can be very short-term vision or short-sighted, right? And this is why regulators exist.
Yeah.
Right. It's just the whole reason. The reason there's consumer protection is to protect us from ourselves. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that when the regulatory frameworks do come in, and there are more clear rails and oversight, then those problems become less, will not happen nearly as much, right?
Okay.
If those don't happen, then absolutely they will keep happening, right? Because again, people are short-sighted, and new people come into the system, and they fall for the same issues that happened previously, and we human beings are naturally lazy, right? Innovation is the mother of laziness, right?
Yeah.
And so I think if there's a shortcut, people will take it. But ultimately, regulators come in and either moderate those shortcuts or eliminate those shortcuts to protect everyone from themselves.
Yeah. And I guess, in a way,
but like TradFi is the same, like Ponzi schemes, whether it's Bernie Madoff or whatever, those have been happening for decades and decades and decades until they go in and they regulate it and they create protections. So it's just not a Web3 native experience. It's just just consistent with the human condition.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to point out to, I think, especially people who are skeptical of crypto and Web3, aren't they? Because it's sort of, you don't want to indulge too much in whataboutism, but then you, as you say, like these things have been happening. The current financial system has been shown on enough occasions to be rotten enough, and that's kind of why crypto exists, as an alternative.
If you look at like the birth of the gold industry, there's this whole idea of why would I want to buy gold that other people hold?
Yeah.
Right. That was such a foreign concept to people at the time. And now no one thinks twice about it. You go into your Fidelity account and take your gold position or whatever. You never see it.
Yeah.
Right. But when the gold industry first started, I mean, it was wrought with fraud and problems and issues, and eventually they put the right regulatory frameworks and controls in place, and now no one thinks twice about it.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, people like the SEC tend to be the sort of the bogeymen for crypto in a way. We give them a lot of flack, and rightly so, I think. But I guess there's no getting away from it. We need, as you say, we need people like that. We need institutions like that to bring clarity to the space, to protect us from ourselves, I guess.
I don't know if it needs to be the SEC, but yes, there needs to be, something, maybe it's an SRO or, some other regulated component, but something. There has to be something. And that creates consumer protections and also lets institutions know how they can participate in a system with minimal risk so that they're comfortable leveraging themselves or their capital of their LPs and customers into that space. So it's both.
Yeah. And I guess it's about having a baseline that people can operate from.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know where you should be walking, you obviously end up walking in circles.
Yeah, or through a minefield.
Or a minefield. Yeah.
So, okay, well, I want to finish off by asking you again your perspective. You have, through the work you do with Republic, you have a pretty wide perspective on the industry, the sort of companies that are building out there, the sort of products that are being built. So what particular sectors of the industry do you feel that are you confident about? Do you think that could be sort of big in the next bull cycle, but also just in the future over the next few years?
Yeah, we sit in a unique seat at Republic because not only do we have all of our different funds, we've got $1.5 billion AUM across all of our funds and SPVs, but we have our issuance platform and custodian and secondary market. So we have a good idea of what's coming into the space. We always like to watch where the investments are happening. Mm-hmm. If capital's invested into something right now, the outcome of that or the fruit of that investment is a year and a half, 18 months to 24 months out, right? Okay. So we get a good vision. And so we've been seeing we've been seeing investment in the space heavily in the real world asset side of it. For the last year or so.
Right.
And so now you're going to start to see kind of the fruit of that labor start to come out. So, RWAs are definitely a hot topic right now. It's the one buzzword I'm hearing all over the place, which is funny because Republic has lived in that for since the beginning. So I would keep an eye out on the real world asset side and security tokens, because I think this is the first time that it's actually something that, that will truly manifest in something significant. I've been talking about security tokens since 2015, but right now there's enough infrastructure for it to actually work. But it's important to recognize that security token customers and traditional crypto customers are different people.
Yeah.
The moment you attach a hard asset value to something, and meaning it can't 1,000x, mm-hmm. Those types of customers are no longer interested. But you also, when you attach a ceiling, you also attach a floor. So there's a safety component there. So we're really excited about real world assets, and in particular, really excited about cultural assets.
Right.
So things like tokenized music, tokenized film, sports, things that are more retail oriented, but will benefit from an underlying blockchain infrastructure. So that's the area right now that we're spending most of our time. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems that the sector of real world assets that, as you say, you guys are watching closely, and that gets talked about a lot. I mean, I've seen some absolutely insane numbers potentially attached to that in the future, that sector. And for me, that seems to be the place where crypto and, if you like, traditional finance are going to meet. And that could, again, that represents a massive opportunity for not just, I guess, people in your position, people like Republic and institutional investors, but I guess also, your average retail investor as well, if it becomes possible to identify, what sort of crypto projects are going to be able to provide the infrastructure for that.
Yeah, I would say what we're seeing is the first true evolution of securities. Right. So let's use this pillow on brand. If this was Coin Bureau stock or Apple stock, right?
Okay,
let's say, This is just simply a financial instrument that you choose to purchase and then sell at a later date, hopefully at a profit. Mm-hmm. That's how it's been since inception, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't really changed. When you tokenize this, now you have the ability to add feature sets to it, different types of utilities. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we're going to be tokenizing an English football team here shortly, and we'll be selling 5% of that team to the fans. Okay.
Right. Okay.
But when we do that, we're going to attach utility to it. It's things like if you own a certain amount of this token, which is equity, mind you, this is a hard asset.
Okay.
That you can meet the players, maybe travel on the coach. One of my favorite things is that you'll be able to buy beer during the game, not just at halftime.
Okay.
Right. So you can start to attach unique things to that security. Now, I like cultural assets in particular because those are things that retail wants to touch. So we tokenize a film, for example, which we do. Mm-hmm. And mostly everything that I talk about is stuff that we do. It's not theoretical for a public. We do tokenize music. We do tokenize film, tokenize sports. So film, you tokenize equity in the film. Then if you have a certain amount of these assets, you can maybe go to the premiere or meet the cast, or maybe you can be an extra in the film. Like all these types of things create a new way to engage between the content and the fan itself. And that's super interesting to us. We fundamentally believe that cultural assets are undervalued. Right? They've been historically just very much actuarial, like math equation that a private equity firm goes in and goes, hey, we're going to buy this song or this album or this catalog. It plays this many times. This is its long tail revenue. This is what our returns will be. It's very calculated. The moment that you let retail participate in it and give them additional ways to engage with that asset, meaning and also to engage with the artist, turns that whole model upside down.
Yeah. And I guess because, one of the sectors that's really suffered the most over the last few months has been NFTs, and been no shortage of people saying, "Oh well, this idea of monkey JPEGs was always a bad one to start with." But as you say, we're only just sort of starting out on that journey of what NFTs particularly can do. Because I remember talking about this with other people in the space, and English football teams, I think, came up as an example. This idea that you can, that your NFT ticket entitles you to, like you say, maybe buy beer during the game, which as an Englishman, I know Brits would really appreciate.
Yeah, for those who don't know, when you go to an EPL game, you can only buy beer at halftime.
Yeah.
And I think only the home team can buy beer also, I think.
That's
also a thing.
As I understand it. They're very keen for, I guess, kind of obvious reasons.
Yeah, I think there's been some historical issues, but we're very early. Let me give you some hard numbers to understand how early we are. Traditionally, it takes human beings 25 to 30 years to accept a new data transfer technology.
Right.
Okay. Radio was invented in the 1890s, and it wasn't in people's homes until the 1920s. Right. TV was invented in the 1920s by a teenager in San Francisco. Wasn't in people's homes until the 1950s. The internet was created in 1970 when TCP/IP was created, and wasn't really in people's homes until 1996, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're looking at here is an email and all these other things. What we're looking at here is a human conditioning issue. It's actually not a technology issue. We can speed it up. Things like, and blockchain is a great example of a way to speed it up because it's open source. All code is written in English. Mm-hmm. And because it's open source, everyone can work on it. So it moves very, very quickly. There's a very interesting parallel between the birth of the internet and blockchain. So TCP/IP was created in 1970, and it was in 1983 that it became accepted as the standard for internet development. Right? Mm-hmm. And so that was 13 years later. And here we are about 14 years later since the creation of Bitcoin, and we're just starting to see standardization take place. Yeah. That is not a coincidence, right? It's simply a human conditioning issue. So, when we talk about how early we are, are we in 1983 the internet? Probably not, right? Mm-hmm. We've probably accelerated a bit faster than that, but not much. Because it still requires us to solve the human conditioning problem. So, every 14-year-old on the planet right now has only existed in a world where Bitcoin's existed.
Yeah, that's crazy to think. Isn't
That's the adoption layer. We're not the adoption layer, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to be because everyone thinks that's where the cool stuff is, but what we're building isn't for us.
Yeah. Wow. What a positive note to end it on, because from someone who, like you say, has been in this for so long, and to have not only kind of kept the faith through ups and many downs
Mostly.
as well. Mostly. But also to, as you say, that's fascinating. I hadn't I think because people talk about crypto in relation to the internet and how long that took to evolve. But I hadn't thought of it in the context of things like radio and TV as well. So even though, as I said earlier, we are at a tough point for the industry now, it's really heartening to hear from someone who's been in it for so long that we are only we're much nearer the beginning of the journey than perhaps most people realize.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for talking to us today. I know how busy you are, so thank you for taking the time. And it's great to get your perspective on things, hear about everything that you're working on, and absolutely fascinating to meet someone who's been in this game for that long. You look good for it.
It's a couple grays, but I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. We will be back again soon, and my thanks again to Andrew for joining us today.